Welcome to the debate. Design thinking, creative genius, or just a buzzword? Today we analyze the ideas from the book The Design Mindset. Unlock your creative potential, solve complex problems, and drive innovation. In a world of, increasing complexity and rapid change, we are constantly facing these, what we might call wicked problems.
Right. Challenges that just don't have a clear-cut answer.
Exactly. They range from overcoming personal barriers to fixing deeply broken systemic issues in our businesses and societies. So the central question we are exploring today is how we actually navigate and solve these massive, ambiguous challenges.
And which side are you taking here?
I'll take the side of the believers here. I genuinely view these heavily human-centered, iterative methodologies as an essential, transformative blueprint for impactful innovation. I mean, it is how we stop guessing and start solving.
Well, and I am going to push back on that quite heavily. I question the practical efficiency of this entire framework. We really have to ask whether these expansive, empathetic, sticky note-heavy processes are actually realistic.
You don't think they are?
Honestly, no. I think we need to look at if they are just a bloated, time-wasting distraction in the real world. Because in the real world, rigorous execution, strict deadlines, and budgets dictate success.
Okay, but to understand why this framework is necessary, we have to look at why the traditional linear problem-solving model is failing us. Traditional methods rely on logical deduction and known parameters.
Right. The standard waterfall approach.
Yeah, exactly. You gather requirements, you build a massive Gantt chart, you execute, and you launch. That works perfectly for building a bridge where the laws of physics don't change. But it completely fails when you are addressing modern complexities, where human behavior is the variable.
Sure, human behavior is messy.
It is. Think about a daily frustration. Have you ever walked up to a door, pulled the handle with all your weight, and slammed right into it because it was a push door?
Oh yeah, the classic Norman door example.
Precisely. You probably felt foolish, right? But you weren't the problem. The design was. It lacked clear signifiers and affordances.
Remind the audience what an affordance is, just briefly.
So, an affordance is essentially the physical characteristic of an object that tells your brain how to use it. A handle inherently affords pulling. A flat metal plate affords pushing. When you put a pull handle on a push door, you are actively fighting human intuition.
Right. It's a structural flaw.
Exactly. And that physical door is just a micro example of what happens on a macro scale in business every single day. A company launches a massive new software platform or, a new business strategy that looks logically flawless on paper.
But then it collapses in the market.
Yes, because it fundamentally misunderstands human behavior. We need these human-centered methods to stop solving surface-level symptoms and start actually addressing true human needs.
Look, nobody is arguing against understanding the user. Empathy is frankly a baseline requirement for good business. But my issue is what happens when you formalize empathy into a rigid, multi-phase corporate framework.
It's not rigid, though.
Well, established procedures, analytical expertise, and linear execution exist for a reason. They get things done efficiently. When you abandon straightforward expert execution in favor of this culture of failing fast and endless iterative loops, you run a very real risk.
What risk?
The risk of completely paralyzing your teams. Everyone gets so busy trying to map out feelings that no actual product gets built.
But let's look at how this actually plays out in practice. Let's start with the very first proposal of the methodology, which is stepping into the user's world to define the right problem.
Okay, the empathy phase.
Right. Before a team writes a single line of code or brainstorms a single feature, the framework demands deep ethnographic research. And this isn't sending out a multiple-choice survey. This is active observation.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning you go into the user's natural environment and you just watch them work. You look for the Post-it notes stuck to their monitors. Those are the workarounds they've created because the current system is failing them.
Okay, but
then you synthesize that qualitative data into personas, which are archetypal users, to prevent the trap of designing for the average user.
hold on, let me stop you right there. Are we actually gaining objective empathy here, Or is building a fictional persona just a bureaucratic way to institutionalize our own biases?
It's based on real observation, though.
But if you tell a team of developers they need to become silent ethnographers for 3 weeks, you are ignoring the reality of a modern business cycle. Think about the strict deadlines most teams are under.
I know, but
If I am tasked with streamlining an internal logistics tool, spending weeks observing unspoken behaviors and crafting fictional avatars feels less like innovation and more like academic theater. Can we really justify that time cost?
Well, you were assuming that skipping this phase saves time. It really doesn't. What if your industry expertise has blinded you to the fact that you are solving the wrong problem entirely?
I mean, that's possible, sure.
It happens all the time. The absolute most inefficient thing a company can do is perfectly execute a solution to a problem nobody actually has. It's like a doctor prescribing an aggressive surgery without examining the patient, running tests, or even asking where it hurts.
That's a bit of an extreme analogy.
But it fits. The doctor can point to their medical degree and say, I am an expert and this surgery is highly efficient. It looks like decisive action, but without that initial diagnostic empathy, it's just malpractice.
Sure, but a doctor relies on vital signs, blood panels, and MRIs. That is hard, empirical data. They don't just ask the patient to tell a story about their day and then turn it into a persona.
Qualitative data still data?
But then this framework takes that subjective data and forces it into a point of view statement. You're effectively taking complex market realities and cramming them into a Mad Libs format, right? Like, user needs X because of insight Y.
It's a framing tool.
And from there, you flip it into a how might we question. Doesn't this highly artificial structure just strip away the actual nuance of the business problem?
No, it doesn't strip away nuance at all. It manages cognitive load. When you observe 50 users, you have a massive, chaotic pile of qualitative data.
Which is overwhelming.
Exactly. So the framework uses tools like affinity mapping, where you group those hundreds of observations by theme or friction point to find the signal in the noise. The point of view statement then acts as a North Star.
A North Star, okay.
Look at the alternative. If a manager says, we need to build a new app, that is a terrible problem statement because it already assumes the solution.
Fair point.
But if your POV is, remote workers need better collaborative document tools because current systems cause version control panics right before deadlines, well, now you have identified a genuine human friction point.
And the how might we question?
The how might we question, like how might we eliminate version control anxiety, simply opens the door to ideation without locking you into a specific answer.
Okay, let's walk through that door then. Because the transition from defining the problem to the wild ideation phase is where I really start to question the return on investment.
Why? Ideation is crucial.
Because once we have our how might we question, the proposal is to shift into divergent thinking. You're asking highly paid professionals to suspend all judgment and generate a massive quantity of wild, unfiltered ideas.
Yes, because you have to bypass the cognitive filters that keep adults locked into safe, mediocre solutions. The human brain is designed for efficiency. It wants to give you the most obvious, incremental answer first.
Which is usually the most practical answer.
But not the most innovative. To break that, we use specific psychological provocations. Take the scamper technique, which forces you to take an existing idea and substitute, combine, adapt, modify, put to another use, eliminate, or reverse it.
That sounds like a lot of steps.
Or Crazy Eights, which is a rapid-fire exercise where you force people to sketch 8 distinct solutions in exactly 8 minutes.
Wait, seriously? You want me to ask senior engineers and product managers to sit in a room and draw 8 ideas in 8 minutes?
Absolutely.
Does this actually work in a high-stakes corporate environment? It sounds like a playground for the mind, which is great for a weekend retreat. But in the real world, time is your most precious resource.
Right, but
Does forcing people into these frantic exercises yield anything beyond just impractical fluff?
It absolutely works, and the time constraint is the entire point. Why 8 minutes? Because your first 3 ideas are going to be the obvious ones.
The safe ones.
Yes. By idea number 5, your analytical brain, your inner critic, is exhausted. You run out of safe ideas. That time pressure physically bypasses your self-censorship, forcing the weird, subconscious, potentially brilliant ideas to the surface.
I am highly skeptical of that.
Well, if that doesn't work, my favorite method is brainstorming the worst possible idea.
You intentionally ask the room to come up with the most terrible, disastrous way to solve the problem.
I'm sorry, but brainstorming terrible solutions when we have a deadline on Friday? That risks completely alienating your stakeholders.
Not if you frame it correctly.
They're waiting for strategic direction, and you're having the team design a purposely broken product. You are burning through resources just for the sake of making people feel creative.
I disagree, because you're assuming that adults in a corporate setting naturally volunteer their most innovative ideas. They don't. Fear of judgment is the single biggest killer of innovation.
Sure, people play it safe.
Exactly. If you ask a room full of executives for a new strategy, they will give you a slightly polished version of last year's spreadsheet because it's safe. Asking for the worst possible idea lowers the cortisol in the room. People laugh. It removes the fear of failure.
And then what? You just have a list of bad ideas?
No. Very often, when you look at the worst idea and reverse it, you find a highly original, viable solution. These exercises are not fluff. They are a necessary, structured provocation to break people out of the Gantt chart mindset. You have to diverge and create a massive quantity of options before you can effectively converge on the truly innovative ones.
On paper, that sounds incredibly liberating. But look at the reality of organizational fatigue. When you force a team to generate 100 wild ideas, you then have to evaluate 100 wild ideas.
That's part of the process.
But the convergence phase becomes a massive bottleneck. And worse, it creates a dangerous illusion of progress. A team feels like they've done a massive amount of work because the conference room is completely covered in colorful sticky notes, but they haven't actually built a single thing or tested anything against reality.
Which is exactly why the methodology absolutely does not stop at the whiteboard. The transition from abstract ideas to tangible experiments is the most critical pivot in the framework.
Okay, so building things.
Yes, this is where we move into the build, measure, learn loop through rapid prototyping. We take the best idea from that session and we build a minimum viable product, or MVP.
Oh man, and this term MVP has become one of the most abused concepts in modern business.
Well, it gets abused when people forget the word minimum. We aren't talking about writing thousands of lines of code or building a fully functional beta here.
Then what are you talking about?
We are talking about using paper prototypes, literally drawing interface screens on index cards and swapping them out when a user taps the paper, or creating low-fidelity digital mock-ups that are essentially just click-through slideshows, or even role-playing a physical service experience.
That seems a bit too rudimentary.
The mechanism here is to gather validated learning as cheaply and quickly as humanly possible. Think of it like a tracer bullet. If you're shooting in the dark, you don't fire your most expensive heavy artillery shell right away.
Right, you'd waste it.
Exactly. You fire a cheap, glowing tracer bullet to see where it lands, illuminate the target, and then you adjust your aim before spending your real budget.
I understand the tracer bullet metaphor, I do. But if I fire a tracer bullet at a Fortune 500 client, they might just fire me.
You wouldn't use it on a live client account in that way.
But where is the line between a rapid prototype and shipping a flawed, half-baked product that actively damages your brand's trust? The cult of iteration can so easily become an excuse for poor initial quality and intellectual laziness.
It shouldn't be an excuse for laziness.
But it becomes one. Teams say, oh, we don't need to think through the architecture. We'll just fix it in the next sprint. If you put a crude paper prototype or a buggy mock-up in front of a major client, you aren't just testing a feature. You are testing their patience and their perception of your competence.
But you are fundamentally misunderstanding how and where an MVP is deployed in this framework. An MVP is a question posed, not a statement declared.
What does that mean practically?
It means you aren't launching a paper prototype to your entire market or your biggest client and calling it a finished product. You are putting it in front of a small, representative group of 5 to 7 users in a highly controlled, one-on-one testing environment. And the goal is to track actionable metrics, not vanity metrics.
Clarify the difference there, because metrics can be manipulated to tell whatever story the team wants.
A vanity metric is something that looks great on a press release but tells you absolutely nothing about business health. Things like total page views or app downloads.
Right, the fluff numbers.
Yes. An actionable metric, on the other hand, is behavioral. Does the user actually click the primary button? Do they retain the service after 3 days? If you put a low-fidelity prototype in front of 5 users and all 5 get confused at the exact same step, you just saved your company 6 months of development time and millions of dollars.
Assuming you listen to the data.
Exactly. You caught the flaw when it cost practically nothing to fix.
But doesn't this hyper-reliance on constant user feedback trap you in an endless cycle of minor reactive tweaks?
I don't see it as a trap.
But if you are constantly building, measuring, and learning based on what a handful of users tell you, you are optimizing for their immediate short-term reactions. You see a dip in an actionable metric, you tweak a button placement. You see a rise, you change a color. You are walking backward into the future.
It's not reactive, though. It is empirical. It's treating your grand business vision as a hypothesis that requires scientific validation rather than blind faith.
But you can lose the bigger picture.
Not if you use the data correctly. If you track an actionable metric and it fails miserably, that negative result is incredibly valuable data. Which brings us to the final and perhaps most crucial part of the framework: navigating the unknown and the decision to either pivot or persevere.
Ah, the famous pivot.
Yes. When that feedback loop yields strong negative results, you don't just keep tweaking the color of a button. You use that data to decide if you need a fundamental recalibration of your strategy, a pivot, or if you should persevere.
And here is my deepest skepticism of the entire methodology. The word pivot has become a sanitized get-out-of-jail-free card for a fundamental lack of vision.
That's a strong claim.
But it's true. You launch something, people don't immediately get it, so you pivot. But what if the problem isn't the product? What if the problem is that you are asking users to validate a concept they don't yet have the context to understand?
You mean being too far ahead of the market?
Exactly. If you are constantly adapting to shifting user feedback, do you ever develop truly visionary, paradigm-shifting solutions? There is the famous, albeit likely apocryphal Henry Ford quote, "If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses."
Right, that quote always comes up.
Because it makes sense. If you rely entirely on pivoting based on immediate user feedback, you build faster horses. You never build the automobile.
The faster horses argument is a classic critique, but I think it fundamentally mischaracterizes how both empathy and pivoting actually work.
How so?
First, if Ford had done proper ethnographic research, he wouldn't have asked what they wanted. He would have observed that their core friction was the speed and physical limitation of biological transport.
Okay, fair.
The automobile solves that exact human need. Second, a pivot isn't abandoning your vision because of one piece of bad feedback. A pivot is a strategic redirection of your approach when there is consistent empirical rejection of your core value proposition.
But it's so easily used as an excuse.
If you are burning resources with no clear path forward, persisting out of stubborn pride isn't visionary, it's foolish. A pivot cultivates the resilience needed to handle wicked problems because it acknowledges that your initial understanding of the problem might have been flawed from the very start.
I understand the theory of strategic recalibration, but in practice, I see teams using the concept of the pivot to avoid the hard, grueling work of pushing through initial market resistance.
Execution is hard, I'll give you that.
It is. Implementation is difficult. Aligning stakeholders is difficult. Scaling a product is incredibly difficult. Teams hit that friction, they look at these evolving variables, and they use the pivot as an escape hatch to go back to the fun, low-stakes world of the whiteboard and the sticky notes.
That's a failure of management, though.
They mistake the difficult phase of execution for a sign that their core idea is flawed.
Well, if a team uses a pivot as an escape hatch to avoid hard work, they aren't applying the design mindset. They are abandoning it entirely. True implementation requires just as much iteration as the initial ideation.
It rarely happens that way, though.
But it should. You have to prototype your communication strategy. You have to iterate on your deployment plan based on stakeholder pushback. The framework isn't an excuse to avoid execution. It's a map for navigating the sheer complexity of it. It requires daily reflection and running micro-experiments to continuously validate that you are actually moving toward a solution that works for human beings.
But a map that constantly redraws itself based on whoever you last tested it on is a profoundly stressful and inefficient map to follow. I think we have to acknowledge that while adaptability is important, There is a profound efficiency in deep, focused execution that this framework actively undermines in its pursuit of constant validation.
While we've covered a lot of ground today, to summarize my side of the debate, these methods, from doing the hard work of deep ethnographic empathy to forcing divergent ideation, firing the tracer bullets of rapid prototyping, and having the strategic courage to pivot, offer a dynamic, evidence-based blueprint.
A blueprint that requires a lot of caveats.
But they aren't just for building software. They are for continuous improvement in leadership and operations. They force us to confront our own biases, test our assumptions cheaply, and build solutions grounded in actual human reality, not just boardroom theories.
And to summarize my position, while the pursuit of user understanding is absolutely valid, these frameworks must be treated with rigorous skepticism.
Which is fair.
Massive organizational trap. It can lead to endless iteration, stakeholder confusion, and a lack of the discipline required for actual delivery.
Which brings us back to the central ideas we explored today from the design mindset. As a listener navigating your own wicked problems, you have to weigh these arguments for yourself.
Exactly.
Are the methodologies to discuss today a must-try toolkit required to survive the complexities of our modern world, or should they be approached with intense caution as potential productivity traps?
Ultimately, the value of these strategies will depend heavily on the context in which you apply them, the urgency of the deadlines you face, and honestly, the maturity of the team wielding them.
Absolutely. It's up to you to evaluate the practical efficiency of this framework for your own specific challenges. But the next time you find yourself yanking on a push door, frustrated and feeling like you've made a mistake, perhaps ask yourself, is the user broken or is the design? We'll leave you to think on that.